Hello everybody, Mobius1 here, and welcome to part 4 of my Star Wars Unlimited Shadows of the Galaxy card set review. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at 8 cards that were revealed to the public back in the beginning of May. And while this episode isn't going to cover any new leader units or mechanics that are being introduced to the game, we are going to see a couple of cards that are expanding upon one of Star Wars Unlimited's lesser used keywords that might create some sort of new deck archetype. If you're new to the channel, I do all sorts of Star Wars gaming content with a focus currently on Star Wars Unlimited. If you want to see more of this content, I really appreciate a like and a subscribe. And while you're down there, why not leave a comment? I like reading them. But with that out of the way, let's get started. The first card we're taking a look at in this episode is Clone Deserter, a 1-cost 2/3 ground unit with Restore 1 and Bounty, draw a card. This is almost exactly what we're getting with Cartel Turncoat, which we looked at a couple episodes ago, except Cartel Turncoat doesn't have Restore 1, and it's a space unit. But the drawback of the Bounty is the same on each card, where when it's defeated, your opponent gets to draw a card. Back when we reviewed Cartel Turncoat, we discussed how strong of an opening play it would be if you began the game by playing 2 Cartel Turncoats. Now, starting the game with 2 Clone Deserters could be equally as powerful. However, I think the fact that Cartel Turncoat is a space unit and Clone Deserter is a ground unit does give a slight edge to Cartel Turncoat. And that's simply due to the fact that most decks currently run more ground units than space units, and that absolutely could change going forward as more cards get added. And the Restore 1 on Clone Deserter is nice, though I don't know how relevant it is if you're running an aggro deck, unless you're going up against another aggro deck. I think in the last episode we compared a couple cards to the 2-cost 3/3 Battlefield Marine unit. I think Clone Deserter can also easily be compared to Battlefield Marine because they both are obviously command heroism units, and they're both very low resource cost. If Clone Deserter cost 2, I don't think you would ever want to take it over Battlefield Marine, because I think the 1 extra attack on Battlefield Marine is better than the Restore 1 on Clone Deserter, especially considering the bounty drawback that comes along with it. But if I've learned anything from playing Hearthstone for years, it's that you have to be very, very cautious when designing 1-cost cards. So as of now, I don't really know what deck Clone Deserter is trying to fit itself into, but if it finds a home, I won't be surprised. The next card we're looking at is Reputable Hunter, a 3-cost 3/4 with if an enemy unit has a bounty, this unit costs 1 less to play. And what do you know? Another unit that can be compared to Battlefield Marine. Notable difference is Reputable Hunter is missing the heroism aspect icon, so it could be run in villainy decks where Battlefield Marine cannot. However, the fact that it is only a conditional 2-drop and it's a 3-drop by default does hurt it quite significantly, especially because it's lacking any other sort of keyword. It's essentially a conditional vanilla 3/4 for 2, which means if there's no enemy units in play with bounties, it's just a vanilla 3/4 for 3, which is really bad. There aren't a ton of 3-cost 3/4s that are being run currently, but one that definitely is Fighters for Freedom. And yeah, it's a 3-cost 3/4, but look at all of the text it has. It has Saboteur, and while it's in play, if you play another aggression card, you can deal 1 damage to a base. Compared to Reputable Hunter, that is stacked. I just really don't see this card being played, even if you are playing a bounty-heavy deck and you're going to be throwing bounty upgrades on your opponent's units as soon as they come into play. The fact that Reputable Hunter is ultimately a vanilla stat line, I just don't think it's worth the slot in your deck that could be used by some other more powerful card. The only saving grace I could say about this card is maybe it's going to be good in sealed formats instead of Premier. Like, I imagine if you're playing sealed or draft or something, then and you're only playing with Shadows of the Galaxy cards, then this card will probably end up being a decent choice. Next, let's take a look at Covetous Rivals, which is a 6-cost 5/5 aggression unit with grit, and when played and on attack, you may deal 2 damage to a unit with a bounty. So at the beginning of the video, I mentioned how we're going to be looking at some cards that are expanding an existing keyword in Star Wars Unlimited, and grit is that keyword. Now, obviously, Grit has been around since the launch of the game. We looked at Gorilla Attack Pod in the last episode, which has Grit, and Grit simply means for each damage the unit takes, you increase its attack power by that much. Covetous Rivals is kind of hard to compare to existing cards. We have the obvious Gorilla Attack Pod here, but Gorilla Attack Pod, as I mentioned in the last episode, is really run in aggression decks because of its when played ability that allows it to sometimes, most of the time, come into play ready. Covetous Rivals, on the other hand, doesn't have that same speed. It does, however, have a bounty synergy, which will allow it to not only win played, but also every time it attacks, deal 2 damage to a unit with bounty. So again, if there's going to be some red aggression bounty synergy deck, then Covetous Rivals could find its way into that deck. On the other hand, if there's going to be some sort of grit-focused deck that involves buffing the HP of your units and then allowing them to take damage so that their attack power gets buffed in return, Covetous Rivals could also fit into that fictional deck. And I say fictional kind of tongue-in-cheek because we're also getting Gentle Giant, which is a 6-cost 2/8 with grit, and on attack, you may heal damage from another unit equal to the damage on this unit. Now yes, Covetous Rivals was red and Gentle Giant is blue-white, but a red-white-blue deck could potentially exist. And this grit keyword is kind of interesting when you look at a stat line such as a 2/8. The only other card in the game with that kind of stat line is Jabba the Hutt, and if Jabba the Hutt had grit, he might see play. Gentle Giant reminds me quite a bit of Chewbacca after he deploys, and not only because they're Wookiees, but their stat line is almost identical and they both have grit. However, the big difference between Chewbacca's leader unit and Gentle Giant is that Chewbacca has Sentinel. Gentle Giant isn't nearly as terrifying as Chewbacca without Sentinel because your opponent could simply ignore it. However, if you were to maybe play Protector and give Sentinel to Gentle Giant, that would change quite a bit. Not only would that increase his stats by +1/+1, bringing him to a whopping 9 health, but now he's a unit that your opponent has to go through if they want to do any damage to your base or other ground units. That is quite a heavy investment, however, with Gentle Giant costing 6 and Protector only costing 1, but having the double Vigilance aspect requirement. But I would imagine in the right matchup, like against an aggressive deck, this would just shut them down completely. And we haven't even really talked about his second ability, the on-attack healing. It's not quite as good as Restore because you obviously can't use it to heal your base. It must be used to heal another unit. But most leader units deploy around the 6 resource cost range. So Gentle Giant could not only be a huge wall to keep all of your units and your base safe if you get Sentinel on him, but once he starts taking some hits, if he sticks around, he can then also be used to heal up any of your other units that might also be damaged. Considering blue has already been established as like the hard control aspect colors in the game, I would not be surprised to see some hard control decks slotting in Gentle Giant and Protector, even if they're not running double blue. Paying 3 to put Sentinel on Gentle Giant might still be worth it. And as if adding 2 new units with grit to the card pool wasn't enough to get us to take a second look at that relatively unused keyword, we then get First Light. First Light is a 7-cost 4/7 space unit, also with grit, and then each other friendly non-leader unit gains grit. In addition to that, it can be smuggled into play for its original cost, but you have to deal 4 damage to a friendly unit. Which, considering the fact that you're giving all of your non-leader units grit, might not be a bad thing. This card is super difficult to analyze. The fact that it can give any non-leader unit in the game grit opens up so many possibilities. I mean, look at Devastator. Need I say more? Now, am I being a little bit too optimistic here? Probably. But in all seriousness, any high HP unit when paired with First Light becomes a really scary threat. And this is the first smuggle card that we've seen that allows you to smuggle it into play without paying additional resources. And you can even use its deal 4 damage to a friendly unit to damage itself, which would bring it into play as an 8/3. And if your opponent doesn't already have something in space ready to counter it or a space sentinel unit to block it before it readies up, that's a lot of damage going to their base on the next round. I think this card is definitely going to find a deck to be put into, and I think it's going to be a staple or a key card in that deck's plan. I can see this card making some sort of grit deck a reality. And like I said, the fact that it can give grit to anything means the designers have to be really careful when they design high HP units. Alright, next up we have a 3-cost event, Take Captive, which says a friendly unit captures an enemy non-leader unit in the same arena. If you don't remember what capture is, it's a new temporary removal mechanic coming in Shadows of the Galaxy, where essentially you do what it says on the card. Take the captured card, place it face down beneath the capturing card, and when the unit who captured an enemy unit is defeated, that captured card is returned to play under your opponent's control, exhausted. So if I'm being honest, Take Captive didn't really impress me when I first saw it. Paying 3 for temporary removal is not really that great. Power of the Dark Side is also a 3-cost card that just straight up defeats a unit, albeit your opponent gets to decide which. And Takedown is a 4-cost card that also just straight up defeats a unit with 5 or less HP, which is not that hard to do. However, you might have noticed that both of those cards I just showed you are blue. Green doesn't have as much access to removal as other colors. Green does have Overwhelming Barrage, which is one of the most impressive removal cards in the game. And while both Take Captive and Overwhelming Barrage require you to have a friendly unit in play in order for them to work, Overwhelming Barrage 1 costs 5 resources instead of 3, and 2 has the villainy aspect requirement where Take Captive does not. The only other removal that green decks have access to is Strike True, which also happens to cost 3 and also requires a friendly unit to be in play, where it just deals damage equal to its power to an enemy unit. I don't think I've ever seen Strike True played, but I would say that Take Captive probably does have a better chance at seeing played than Strike True. Yes, it is temporary, but the fact that it just gets a unit off the board and out of the way could be useful. The only other capture card we've seen up to this point is the Mandalorian's Rifle, and that one only works when it's equipped to the Mandalorian. Take Captive can work with anything. And let's also not forget that when you capture a unit, you also get to collect its bounties. So if you're playing this in some sort of bounty deck, not only are you getting the benefit of removing the unit, but you'll also be getting the bounty reward on whatever unit it is that you remove. I don't know. I don't think Take Captive is a great card. I think it's going to struggle to see play, but if we see any powerful green bounty cards later on in the set, that is going to make Take Captive a juicier option. Next up, we're going back to the Mandalorians with Clan Challengers, a 5-cost 3/6 with Raid 3, and while this unit is upgraded, it gains Overwhelm. So it's a 5-cost 3/6 that is essentially a 6/6 when it's attacking thanks to the Raid 3, and if you can slap an upgrade on it, it gets Overwhelm, which let's not forget that experience tokens and shield tokens count as upgrades. I think it's not a stretch to compare Clan Challengers to Steadfast Battalion. They both cost 5, they both have roughly the same stat line, and Steadfast Battalion also has Overwhelm. And although Steadfast Battalion doesn't require you to jump through any hoops by putting upgrades on it to get access to Overwhelm, it also is not going to have the same synergies that the Clan Challengers have simply by having the Mandalorian trait. For example, in the last episode, we looked at the new leader that's coming to Shadows of the... For example, in the last episode, we looked at one of the new leaders coming to Shadows of the Galaxy, Bo-Katan Kryze, who allows you to deal 1 damage to units if you've attacked with a Mandalorian that phase. And while I'm sure there's still a ton of upgrade cards coming in Shadows of the Galaxy that we've yet to see, we can look at a couple of upgrades that we already have access to with Spark of the Rebellion and see how good they would make Clan Challengers. Starting with Electrostaff. Tossing Electrostaff on a Clan Challengers makes its total cost 7, right? 5 for the body and 2 for the upgrade, but that brings its stat line up to an 8/8 with Overwhelm when it attacks, and even though it'll only be a 5/8 when defending, thanks to the Electrostaff, the attacking unit will suffer -1 to its attack power. And if you don't think that's good, take a look at Entrenched, which, by the way, is already run quite often in today's meta. Entrenched also would bring Clan Challengers' total cost to 7 resources. And yes, Entrenched would prevent it from attacking bases, but because it has Overwhelm, it doesn't really matter. Throwing Entrenched on Clan Challengers makes it a 9/9 Overwhelm, which is more than enough to deal with just about anything your opponent could play in the ground arena, and any excess damage would be carried over to the defender's base anyway. I think this is a terrifying combination. If your opponent does not have some sort of hard removal to get rid of Clan Challengers after you've entrenched them, they just simply can't play anything in the ground arena for the rest of the game. And while this is less impressive, let's also not forget that the bounty cards coming in Shadows of the Galaxy are themselves upgrades. So even if you don't put an upgrade on Clan Challengers, the fact that it gains Overwhelm when upgraded discourages your opponent from attaching bounties to it. Yes, my Clan Challengers may now be wanted, but thank you for giving them Overwhelm. And the last card we're going to be taking a look at in this video is Ketsu Onyo, a 2-cost 3/2, also Mandalorian, with Saboteur, and when this unit deals combat damage to a base, you may defeat an upgrade that costs 2 or less. Immediate comparison to Sabine, who is another 2-cost aggression, heroism, Mandalorian unit, which is fitting because in lore, Ketsu and Sabine were friends. I'm going to go ahead and venture a guess and say that Ketsu is probably going to replace Sabine in quite a few aggression decks. She's clearly not a strictly better unit because her HP is only 2, where Sabine has 3. But not only does the Saboteur keyword allow her to ignore enemy units with Sentinel, which could allow you to push for lethal damage to a base when your opponent tries to block, but also the fact that she has the ability to defeat upgrades that cost 2 or less whenever she damages the base, which could include experience tokens or shield tokens, makes her kind of a better utility card than Sabine as well. I mean, we were just looking at how powerful Entrenched was on Clan Challengers. Well, if Ketsu damages a base, there goes the Entrenched. And again with the bounties, if your opponent is throwing bounty cards onto your units, every time you hit the opponent's base with Ketsu, you can just straight up discard them, as long as they cost 2 or less, which it seems like they will. And while I personally think I would run Ketsu over Sabine, there's nothing wrong with running both of them at the same time. If you're an aggressive deck, you want to run multiple cheap units like this to flood the board with early on. And, by the way, they both have the Mandalorian tag, which means they fit right in with Bo-Katan, which even further solidifies the fact that I'm going to be trying to make a Bo-Katan deck almost immediately after Shadows of the Galaxy releases. I'm telling you, this red, white, and blue Bo-Katan Mandalorian Upgrade deck, it's gonna exist. I'm gonna make it exist. So yeah, Ketsu Onyo, I think very strong aggro card. Probably going to be run in just about every aggression, heroism aggro deck. And yeah, bring on more Mandalorian synergies. So that's all 8 of the cards we're going to be looking at in this episode. Let me know in the comments which of these you found most exciting. Is grit going to be the next big thing? Is capturing units going to be strategically viable? Is the Mandalorian Upgrade deck going to be OP? God, I hope so. We still have quite a few more cards to go through in less than a month until the next set comes out, so I still have quite a lot of work ahead of me. But I hope you're all finding these videos enjoyable and a little bit educational. Thank you all for watching them. Mobius1 here, and I'll see you in the next one.